Hey there, interwebs, and welcome back to How Fascinating. This is an ampersand, and it means and. You probably already knew that, but that's only the end of the story. The fascinating part is how we got here, and we're starting at the ampersand. I mean that both literally and figuratively. In the 1880s, the word ampersand had become slang for hindquarters, posterior, or rear end. This was because, prior to that time, in the 1860s, the ampersand was treated as the 27th letter of the alphabet, included at the very end in textbooks and other educational materials. It wasn't called the ampersand just yet, though, or rather, it was in the process of getting the name. At the time, it was just called and. When reciting their alphabet, instead of saying W, X, Y, and Z, children would say W, X, Y, Z, and. Except not exactly. You probably noticed that saying and sounds really weird and clunky, so to clarify that the character and was being referred to, the last two words were split apart with the Latin phrase per se, meaning by itself. Fair warning, this video will contain a considerable amount of Latin, much of it gratuitous, so caveat emptor. Now the alphabet concluded with XYZ and per se and, which over the subsequent years slurred together and morphed into the word ampersand as we know it today. That history alone, I believe, is fascinating, but it's only one half of where the ampersand came from. It's where we got the name, sure, but the other half is, of course, the formation of the symbol itself, and obviously that's even older. I did tell you we'd be starting at tergo and working our way backwards, didn't I? Despite being treated as one in the 1860s, the ampersand isn't actually a letter, per se. It's a different type of grapheme known as a logogram or logograph, a symbol or character representing a word or phrase. Your word of the day is logogram. Another example of a logogram is this character, commonly known today as the @ sign, more on that later. The ampersand as a symbol was formed through orthographic ligature, and oh boy, more big words. Orthography is, simply, the part of language study which deals with letters and spelling, or the representation of sounds of a language by written or printed symbols. Ligature is something which binds or connects, or the act of binding two or more things together. It comes from the Latin word ligatus, meaning to tie or bind, which is also where we get the word ligament, the connective tissue which holds your bones together. Some other English orthographic ligatures with which you're probably more familiar are the graphemes ash and oe, which are pronounced like a long e. Exempli gratia, eon, demon, fetus, and phoenix. These are specifically examples of diphthong ligature, the combination of two gliding vowels into a third distinct sound somewhere between the two. Incidentally, I researched my bollocks off and could not find any sort of English name for this character. Some people seem to call it the French ligature, not to be confused with the French connection, because allegedly every English word to use it comes from French, but the French call it e dans l'o, which just means e and the o. Another lingual relative of English from across the channel is German, and they've got their own sui generis ligatures, most famously the S-et. Many English speakers call it the bee with a tail, but it's actually a ligature of the long s and lowercase z, hence the name S, zet, z. For reference, the long s is that obsolete character which looks like a modern-day F and can be seen in words like paradise, lost, and majestic. The S-set is also often confused with the ligature of the long S and the round S, and these days a double S is frequently substituted for it, but that's neither here nor there. The S-set can be seen here, on this street sign, along with the far less common ligature of the T and Z in Platz. These are both digraphs, also known as digrams, not to be confused with diagrams, which are pairs of letters combined together to form a distinct sound, like the SH in fish. There's also the interrobang, made by combining the question mark, or interrogative point, with the exclamation point, also known in the jargon of printers and programmers as a bang, hence interrobang. It was invented relatively recently in 1962 as Martin Spector's magnum opus for use in advertising, and the only reason I'm mentioning it now is because it was nearly part of the logo of this series, along with the ligature of H and F. So what does this all have to do with the ampersand, you may be wondering? Very little, if I'm being honest. I just got sidetracked on a bit of a tangent about orthographic ligature, but hopefully you now have a better understanding of the concept. The ampersand is, as previously mentioned, another case of it, made by squishing something together, id est et. That is, in Latin, it is and. What does that crazy jumble of words mean? The Latin word for and is et. For example, etc., also known as etc. by people who are wrong, means and the rest, and the famous last words et tu, Brute, mean and you, Brutus. It's spelled et, and if you squash those two letters together, you get an ampersand. It's more obvious in some typefaces than others. And then there's the ampersat, more commonly known as the @ sign in the West or alphasand in East Asia. Unlike the ampersand, its name only derives from and per se at indirectly. It's simply called the ampersat because it means at and is a symbol like the ampersand. Although a large majority of its modern use is with email and social media, it started out as mercantile shorthand. For example, you'd write 10 widgets at a rate of $3 each, like this. It also has a fascinating ad hoc use in Spanish gender neutrality. You see, Spanish nouns are gendered either male with an O suffix or female with an A suffix, like amigo and amiga. In cases where the gender is either mixed or unknown, you're supposed to default back to male, again, like amigos. Proponents of gender neutrality and inclusivity argue for the use of the @ sign as a neutral third suffix. The Real Academia Español, or Royal Spanish Academy, the institution charged with ensuring the stability of the Spanish language, disapproves of this usage of the @ sign, but screw those guys, language is a living thing that grows and changes, and I'll happily get behind the new suffix just as soon as someone explains how to pronounce it. The real reason I bring up the ampersand, however, is to introduce this visual pun and ampersand variant which I've created. The encircled A means at, which is A followed by T. Ergo, an encircled E should be E followed by T, or et, meaning and. Furthermore, if one were to encircle an I, well, I think you get it. Anyway, thanks for coming to my TED Talk and have a fascinating day.